Because why? Because you don't understand how much you need to be forgiven. And the point of the message that I'm trying to get across today is here's this woman who everybody else thought was so weird, so trashy, so just lower than them. Nobody wanted anything to do with them. And Jesus said, you know what? This is the type of person that I want to reach out to. This is the type of person, they have such a great debt that they need the gospel. They need forgiveness. They need to be reached out to. As long as we stay in our pharisaical hole here and we just talk about people who don't really see their problems or their need for Jesus or anything, we're going to discontinue reaching out to these people. And Jesus said those people who have the greatest debt will be the most powerful when it comes to appreciating their forgiveness. And you know, that's the truth. I meet people who grow up in church and they think they've never done too much wrong, so Jesus didn't really forgive them for very much. But you meet somebody who came out of being a crack addict and come to Jesus. And they understand what forgiveness is. And they'll say, you know what, I was lost and now I'm found. I was blind. I know Jesus and thank God, because if it weren't for Him, I'd be dead right now. And there's a different level of appreciation for the forgiveness when somebody recognizes how low in sin they were. So that's the first story. Jesus did not condemn her for touching Him. He didn't say, get away from me. He said, you know what? She needed forgiveness. I'm going to show her how to achieve that forgiveness. I'm going to give her that forgiveness. Christ can give forgiveness. All we can do is give people Christ. But we can give people Christ so that they can know forgiveness. Second story, very quickly, jump to John chapter 4. And I'll try to be brief as I give these stories. These 4 stories just stuck out in my mind. I didn't have to look for them when I was writing this message. I just said, you know what? These are the 4 stories I want to talk about. Because these 4 stories resonate in my heart regarding people who are just a little bit off compared to what we might think in normal, whatever normal is, society. John chapter 4. And I won't read the whole passage, but I'll get it started. It says, now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus Himself did not baptize, but only His disciples, He left Judea and departed again for Galilee. And He had to pass through Samaria. So He came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field of Jacob had given his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, so Jesus, wearied as He was from His journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour, about noon. A woman from Samaria came to drink water. And Jesus said to her, give me a drink. Now most of us know the story, but I'll give it to you in a nutshell. This is basically what the story is. Here's Jesus is going to go through Samaria, which was not something that was the most popular thing to do at the time. The Jews and the Samaritans did not get along because the Samaritans were considered to be half-breed Jews, because the Jews that were left over from the captivity in Persia had intermingled with the Gentiles and had created the Samaritan race, which was a mixture. They weren't considered fully Jews, so they were called Samaritans, and they weren't appreciated by the Jewish people as being fully Jewish. And Jesus goes through Samaria, and He sits down at a well, and He waits for this woman to show up. And this woman shows up. And again, we all know the story. Here she comes at noon. Why did she come at noon? Because all of the women in civilized society came out early in the morning. They would all come as a group together early in the morning. But she came out at noon. Why? Because she was an outcast. She came out by herself. Why? Because nobody wanted anything to do with her. Why? Jesus explains later. He starts talking to her and starts sharing the gospel with her. He talks to her about living water and all these things. And He says, if you'd have known the type of water I can give you, you would have asked for it and you would have drank and you never go thirsty again. And she goes, what kind of water is this? And He tells her about the living water. And He says, go tell your husband to come here. Jesus knows a little bit more about her than she thinks. And she goes, what? What do I do? Why go? She goes, I can't go get my husband. He goes, you're right. And He tells her that you've had a number of husbands. He goes, the one you're living with now is not your husband. So here you've had all of these illicit relationships. You've gone from man to man to man to man, and then now you're living in fornication outside of wedlock, and that's why you're out here by yourself at noon, isn't it? Because you have, in the civilized society, chosen to go against the norm, and you are an outcast. And at that moment, she realizes that this man speaking to her, this is a prophet from God. And she begins to ask him religious questions, and she begins to open up her heart to him. And finally, what does she do? She leaves her bucket. Always an interesting little thing people forget about. But what did she come there for in the first place? She came to get water, but she left her bucket behind, didn't care. She ran out to get everybody. She said, "Come and see this man who told me everything I ever did." And she brought out her whole town to come and meet Jesus. So what did Jesus do with an outcast? He turned her into an evangelist. Instead of bypassing her, going around Samaria, he went straight through Samaria just so he could run into somebody who would have been considered the town trash, just so he could talk to that person and love them and use them for his glory. Another story. Luke 19. Get away from women a little bit and deal with a man who is a little weird. Luke 19, verse 1. He entered Jericho and was passing through, and there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. And he was seeking to see who Jesus was. But on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was small of stature. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all grumbled, "He has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner." Now, when I talk about his weirdness, I'm not going to talk about his height. Just so everybody knows, that's not what made him different. What made Zacchaeus different was Zacchaeus was a tax collector. Zacchaeus had turned his back on his people. You see, the Romans, when they came in, they did one of the smartest things that they could have ever done. Instead of sending in Roman tax collectors, they took Jewish people and they gave them the authority to be tax collectors. So they were kind of the turncoats of society. And he said, and instead of sending in their people, which would have caused problems between the Roman relation and the relationship with people, they just got their own people to turn on them. So now there's infighting and a little bit of civil war going on there between those people who are tax collectors and those people who are not. And Zacchaeus, the wee little man was he, realized there was something in his life that was not right. He realized there was something in his life that was missing. So he hears about this guy walking through town. But because of his smallness of stature, he can't see Jesus, and he knows he's not going to get Jesus' attention. So what does he decide to do? I'm going to climb a tree. Yeah, that's normal. I'm going to climb up a tree and hang off the branch so I can look down and see Jesus as he comes by. Noble people, and I've mentioned this in sermons before, and many of you have heard this. Noble people, or society's upper class in that time in history, did not show their legs in public. In fact, if a man had to run anywhere, he would have to hike up both sides of his garment, expose his legs, and run. And that's why men of nobility didn't run. If you needed them, you had to wait. Because they weren't going to expose their legs because that was considered improper. Well, he exposed a lot more than that. He probably had to tie up his little garment just so he could skedaddle up that tree. And here he's all exposed and he's got his little thing tied up and he's trying to hide as much as he can. He's holding out, he's looking over. How weird is that? Just a little off. And what does Jesus say? Look at the weirdo in the tree. No.